Welcome back to CriCri Aviation. My name is Jim Payne, and in this video we are going to fabricate and install frame 2. We're also going to fabricate and install the upper forward fuselage supports that will eventually be the supports for the top of the nose gear leg. We're also going to fabricate and install the side stiffeners that go between frame 3 and frame 1 on the forward fuselage. So, as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please follow me on Instagram and Facebook. The links are in the description, so stick around. Thanks for watching. What we're going to start working on next is frame 2. Now frame 2 is the one that goes on the side of the fuselage here, and it goes diagonally down the side, and of course it goes across the bottom and has to go over the pedal rails, back up the other side and across the top. So what I'm going to do is just start off by bending the edges on these to the correct angles and the correct width. I do want to point out here though that these, which are the two side pieces, are not, this side here is not perfectly straight, because obviously if you're going diagonally across the fuselage here, you actually end up with a curve. So we're actually curving these just a slight amount, and it's kind of shown in the plans that I think it's supposed to be 1 millimeter wider here and here approximately, and then you're supposed to create a curve that goes from the end here through that 1 millimeter wider. It gets at its widest point in the middle, comes back here 1 millimeter wider, and back to the end point here. So what we're going to have to do with these though is on the outside here, we're going to actually have to bend these in a curve. They've been cut in a curve. We're going to have to bend them in a curve. So I'm going to have to create an MDF form, and what I'm going to do is bend the inside here and the inside of this, and then I'll slip the form in here, and then I'll just bend these edges on the outside around the outside of the form that I create that will also have that same curve in it. This is obviously the part that goes across the bottom. We're going to go ahead and bend that, and this is the piece that goes across the top. I have pre-drilled all of the holes in these on the top and the bottom, so that again I can attach these to the side once I get them in the right position, and then we can just go ahead and bend this, put this in the right position behind it, and once they are positioned properly, we'll be able to just drill out the holes between the two and hold them together. So that's the plan. Let me see if I can just start bending these and getting at least the sides ready to go and the bottom ready to go, so we can start fitting these in there. I started off by just bending this bottom frame first, and so I bent the bottom edge here. It's a 12 millimeter flange that has to stick out that goes on the bottom of the fuselage, but this top bend is a little bit more complicated. So what we're supposed to do is bend the top over, and then we're supposed to do a second bend of a 6 millimeter that kind of wraps around into a horseshoe shape. So I was able to bend it this far in my bender, but I can't bend this all the way down on the back side to 90 degrees or parallel with the front face here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this form that I created in the previous video to do the pedal rails. This is pretty much the same width. This is a little bit narrower though, so what I'm going to do is put a shim on one side, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in here with the shim behind it, so I make sure I get exactly the I think it's 12 millimeters inside width that I need on this, and then I'm going to clamp it down and go ahead and just pound this down gently with a rubber mallet or a hammer, just to try and get this down to 90 degrees, and that should be able to finish this off pretty easy. So let me go ahead and try and do that, and then once that's done, I'll go ahead and bend the sides next. Alright, bending that inside edge there, that 6 millimeter one, worked pretty well around just using this form as I had used before. The only thing I would say is I'd almost like to run this through my table saw and take the rounded edge off of this, because it's very difficult to get as tight a bend on this side as we've got on this side, and ideally it'd be nice to just get that radius a little bit tighter, but this isn't bad. It looks pretty good. Anyway, Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bend these side pieces. The inside edge is straight, so I'm just going to go ahead and bend that on my bending brake. And then what I'm going to do is have an MDF form that slides in here that will go up against that bend that we already create, and then go ahead and bend this other side over to match the curve that needs to go in both of these. So let me go ahead and cut out the MDF that I'm going to use for this form, and then we'll go ahead and start bending these. Okay, I've got the MDF forms cut out here that I'm going to use to bend the other side, the fuselage side of these side panels. And I think you can see, let me see here. Yeah, so there is a slight curve on this side, and this side's flat. So what the plan is to take the flat side and just put it in here up against the existing flange on the one side, and then I'm going to clamp on the other side. You see that actually is going to go that way because we've got two identical forms here, and all I'm going to do is clamp this piece in between here like so, and then we'll just bend this flange over along that curved side, and that should work pretty good. We're not supposed to bend this fully at 90 degrees. I think it's supposed to be short, 3 degrees or something like that. But yeah, let me go ahead and just clamp this together, see if I can just bend these over and see how they fit in the fuselage. Okay, I was able to finish shaping the curved side of the fuselage. These look good. And so I think what I'm going to do next is go ahead and get my line on the back side of here to show the center of where the rivets are supposed to go. And then what I'll do is I'll start fitting these inside the fuselage along the rivet holes that I've created, and see if I can get these drilled and held into place with temporary sheet metal fasteners, and then we can go ahead and start fitting the piece across the bottom. Yeah, so you can see on these parts what I'm doing is just marking my edge distances for these rivets next to the edge of the flange and then down the center. And then I'm putting these in place here and I'm putting these in place in here and then just locating those lines to make sure that my holes that are already drilled in the side of the fuselage here are matching up and the proper edge distance away, for example, here and on the other side here. And luckily everything's lining up perfectly, so I was able to just line up the top hole and start drilling my way down on each one of these sides. So I'm going to finish drilling this one, and then I'm going to go to the other side, make sure that these holes line up, which they should because they're the same as this side, and I'll start drilling and pinning this one into place with temporary fasteners on the other side. All right, I've got the two sides now pinned into place with the clecos. And this is all fitting. It's perfect. I did put the piece across the bottom here, and I just fit it in here. It sits underneath these two side pieces, and again, that fits perfectly too. It's a little tight on the edges. In fact, it's pushing on the skin enough that I might just take a little bit off of either end, but otherwise this is fitting quite well. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward with bending the top. It just gets a lip on the bottom that's 12 millimeters, and then it gets a 12 millimeter lip on the top, and I think the top has to be bent at like 27 degrees because it's got to match up with the sheet metal that goes across the top here. But yeah, let's go ahead and bend this one, see if we can get that one into place, and then I might drill a couple holes in the bottom and just use some temporary sheet metal fasteners to hold that in place. So I went ahead and fit the upper skin on here just to check across here. It looks great, and everything's lining up really nicely. So, oops. But yeah, that's frame 2. So we just got a little bit more fitting and some final drilling, and that should be ready to go in. I got a little bit farther with frame 2 here, and I went ahead and drilled all of the rivet holes in the corner, and I did go ahead and mark and drill the rivet holes across the bottom. So this is actually fitting really well. As you can see across the top here, I'm nice and flat and flush. I think what I am going to do though is I want to make sure that this is the proper distance from frame 1, and there are 2 frames that are supposed to go in here, or webs, I'm not really sure what you'd call them, but they go basically from here up to frame 1 that connect the 2 together. I do want to make sure that I can bend and fit in these 2 frames that go across the front here, just to make sure that this is positioned in the right spot and that I'm not pushing it back or pulling it forward. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those out and just temporarily fit those in there just to see what my distance actually is before I finalize any of the rest of the stuff with frame 2. The other thing I want to check too is to make sure that I can get the foam stiffeners that have to go through frame 2 here in these spots, that they actually do fit through here, and that I don't need to widen these out just a little bit more. I am using 3/8 thick foam material instead of, I think it's 10 millimeters recommended. Maybe it's less than that. I'm not sure. I know mine's a little bit wider than what it's technically supposed to be because I'm using imperial instead of metric dimensions for the foam. And I did that same thing on the rear fuselage too, although we didn't have any places where we had to go through frames similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and check that and just make sure that's okay before I finalize this. And so let me check a few of these things, and then we'll come back and take a look in a few minutes and see what we can do next. So I cut out the 2 parts that get mounted on the top of the fuselage between frame 2 and frame 1. That's what these parts are right here. And these little parts are designed to be bent, and they actually go between these 2 frames. These frames get mounted pretty close together. And in between here is mounted the upper mount for the nose gear. So what I want to do with these is just bend these into the right shape, get these fit into the fuselage. We're not going to install these permanently at this point because I want to have access to the front of the fuselage. So we're just going to get this stuff fit in there to make sure that what we're doing with frame 2 is all working out and fitting properly before we finalize some of the parts on frame 2. Now these have to be bent to the curvature of the top of the fuselage. So we're actually going to use a couple of forms here that are curved to the shape of the top of the fuselage. And what we're going to do is just bolt these parts in between 2 of the forms, and then we'll go ahead and bend all of the sides. One of the sides is actually bent completely 90 degrees, so what I may end up doing, just to get a nice clean bend on that, is bend the bottom side on the bending brake, and then go ahead and fit this in here afterwards, and then bend the top over, which has to be curved. Now I might have to put some flutes in here because this upper skin, when it's bent, and I think this actually goes this way, but this upper skin, when it's bent, may not sit flat. If it doesn't, then what I'll have to do is go back and check the plans and see where rivets are installed, and go back and just put a few small flutes in here to just stretch this material a little bit more so I can get it to conform to the shape as best we can. So let me go ahead and play around with starting to bend these, get these clamped between these, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're done. Okay, so I bent the bottom here on the bending brake just to get that nice and straight. And then on top here, I was able to bend this around this curve, but you can see there's a fair amount of spring back. It's a little ripply, so I am going to have to put some flutes in here. Now, I started to figure out exactly where all the rivets were going to come through, which I marked with a little line right here. And then I was a little bit concerned about the supports that need to attach between these and the nose gear attachment and a few other things, but then I realized that all of that gets mounted on the inside between these 2 and the flange is on the outside. So it looks like, as long as I miss the rivets, that I can put a flute anywhere in between the rivets, and it doesn't look like it will interfere with the supports that go between, which are these, which mount on the other side, and also the landing gear mount. So I think I'm going to go through, and what I'm going to do is taper the end of this too, so that I can try and take out some of that spring back with the hammer. And then I'll go ahead and start putting a few flutes in here in between. I think what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and cut flutes into all the spots in between, just so that's the maximum that I would need. And then maybe I'll start by just going every other one and see if that's enough to clean this up, or if I actually have to go every one. Because I don't want to put any more in there than I need to, and I certainly don't need to stretch it a whole lot, but it still can be difficult, between here and here to get this to lay flat. So I probably am going to have to use them all anyway. But let me go ahead and take this apart, and I'll go ahead and cut a taper on the edge of this, and then go ahead and mark the flutes with a file, and we'll come back and see if I can clean it up. Okay, I ended up just fluting this in all the spots. It was very difficult to get a nice even curve without doing that, and since I can, I might as well. It's not going to hurt anything. This one actually turned out good. I did fit this inside of the front of the fuselage here. You know, this goes, let's see, this way. So this one goes, you know, about here underneath the skin here. It fits perfectly. It's touching the frame back here right at the top. It fits all the way at the top, touches the front here. So there's no gap and it's not pushing out on frame 2. So this looks like it's going to work really well. I'm going to go ahead and bend the other one. And the other thing I'm going to do is the supports that go between these that need to be bent. I'm going to go ahead and bend those two on my bending brake. And go ahead and get these fit in there, because then what I can do is I can connect these two together once I have them both formed, and then I'll be able to put them in and out of the front of the fuselage as one unit. Now what happens with these is this gets bent right along here, and this little tab on the bottom actually sticks out over the base here, and there's a rivet that goes through, and then these other two, this tab here gets bent over, and on the inside gets riveted to these two holes here. So I finished bending the other side of this unit that fits between frame 1 and frame 2. I also bent the connecting parts that go in between here. So they get that tab bent on the end, and then it gets bent over and riveted onto the bottom, as you can see here. And it's got the tabs on the inside, and so anyway, this is pretty much ready to be fit now into the airplane. I'm going to try and get this attached to frame 1 and frame 2 so that I can make sure that frame 2 at the top stays in place where it needs to be. So I'm going to start fitting this in the airplane, and we'll see if it all fits together. I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. I just temporarily fit this in here and just clamped it on the ends just to check the fit. The fit lengthwise is absolutely perfect. It couldn't be any better. I still have to create the little joggles on the end here so that this stays flush with frame 1 and frame 2 here. I'll probably just go ahead and do that real quick. But I'm ready to go ahead and drill the holes and put this in, or hold this in here with the temporary sheet metal fasteners, because it's definitely looks good. So just to point out here, you can see the holes here. This is where the upper part of the nose gear, which is going to go down and through that phenolic block that we have down here. This is where the actual nose gear leg is going to go. So, but yeah, this looks great. I'm just going to keep working on this and finish fitting this in here, and until it's held in permanently, or held in with temporary sheet metal fasteners for now. And yeah, we're moving forward pretty good on this one. I was able to finish getting these upper supports for the forward fuselage installed, or at least drilled and temporarily held into place onto frame 2, and also up here on frame 1. I went ahead and put the top back on here just to, again, check the fit and check the contour inside. Everything is fitting very well. I have a nice smooth, you know, unnoticeable taper here on the nose like it should have. It looks really good. So where I'm at now is I really need to install the fuselage stiffeners. So similar to what we did with the rear fuselage, we have to put some Divinycell foam pieces in 2 spots. One goes across here, and that's why frame 2 is notched out here and here. So there's a second spot that goes here. And I think we have to fill in between here with 2 pieces, and then we have to fill in with 1 piece that goes from here on frame 3 all the way up to frame 1. And we need to do that on both sides before we finish and install frame 2. So I think at this point what I'm going to do is take a break from messing around with frame 2 and these stiffeners in the front here, and go ahead and start working on these foam pieces that need to get installed on the side panels. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to take this and flip it on its side. We're going to install those stiffeners that go on the side. We're going to put weights on it so that it can, you know, keeps the contour of the side of the fuselage. And so one of the things I did do is I went ahead and cut out a couple of pieces to make the form so that I can take the fuselage and now set it on its outside side, so that when we do those stiffeners, I can put weights inside the fuselage and it will rest nice and flat on this surface. And what I did for this is I just cut out 2 more MDF parts that use the existing legs that I had from doing the inside forms, and then this is actually the inside form cover part that I made out of the hardboard that I just unscrewed from the inside form, and then just using the same holes just screwed it down to the outside form. So I'm kind of reusing parts here, as I go. I went ahead and sanded these down just to make sure there was no bumps where the screws go through. So I think what I'm going to do then is go ahead and take the temporary sheet metal fasteners here out of frame 2 and then get this set on its side over there and just see how everything is looking, and then start making the foam stiffeners that we need to install and fitting those in place. So what I'm working on now is, before I can install frame 2, I have to install stiffeners similar to what we installed on the rear fuselage that are going to go from frame 3 here. They're going to go through these 2 slots here and end up curving and then attaching up here somewhere to frame 1. These actually will get bent a little bit, so I'm going to be curious to see how these actually end up fitting in here. So what I'm going to do is just make these parts here first, the foam piece that goes between the 2 frames. We'll get the cap cut and fit on there. We'll get those glued together, and then we'll come back and start fitting those in place. And I'm going to have to figure out a way to, hold those in a proper spot down here in order to keep them from, moving when they need a curve. Need to be curved as they're glued. So I might actually create some maybe some MDF forms that I can just slip over the top in certain spots to just keep it to conform to its shape. Obviously I'll have to put in the side of frame 2 here just to make sure that it fits through these slots. And it does look like I'm going to have to widen these slots just a little bit, so I'll just take a file and just make these a little bit wider just so they're not too tight against those stiffeners. So that's what I'm working on right now. I did go ahead and cut out 2 strips of the cap for those stiffeners. That's going to fit on top of the 3/8 foam that I am using for my fuselage stiffeners. So let me go ahead and get the foam pieces cut and fit in here, and then I'll go ahead and cut the caps to fit on top of those, and then we'll go through the process of alodining, gluing those, and fitting those in here. And I'll show you what it looks like when we start fitting those into place here. But we need to do that on one side. I'll have to let it sit overnight. We'll have to do the other side, let that sit overnight, and in fact I'm going to have to probably glue these caps on tonight and let those sit overnight so that I can work on this again tomorrow. So all right, I'm going to start working on this, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little further. I decided to try and address these lips that needed to be bent on these front supports on the CriCri. So what I did is I took the form that I already had in MDF that I used to make this shape, and I ran it through my table saw and just created a notch in the end here so that I could get the thickness down here to the 12 millimeters thick that it's supposed to be to bend this lip on the edge. And what I did first is I took this metal piece and I put it in my bending brake, and I was able to bend it this far, but obviously I can't bend it the remaining amount. So I went ahead and put it back in this form, and then what I'm going to do now that I've cut that lip down to the right thickness is I'll just go ahead and pound this lip down around that edge, or maybe use a board or something and clamp it to just try and press that into that shape, that final shape. But this looks like it's going to work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish bending these lips on these forward supports, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Apparently Jim forgot how to use a pan brake. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the angles here on frame 2, these 6 millimeter lips that are needed here and also down here on the bottom part of frame 2, can be bent on the bending brake without doing what I did and putting it in a form to final bend it. Because of the order in which I did things here, I kind of did it backwards. If you bend the 6 millimeter lip first here and down here, you can flip it around and then still put it in the brake and bend the 12 millimeter side up. The 6 millimeter side won't hit, or shouldn't hit, at least the fingers on your bending brake. So you can get this bend, the 6 millimeter one and the 12 millimeter one bent on the bending brake at the same time. What you will have to do though is bend those first, and then still using a form like this that's cut out, you'll have to slip it back in there and then bend this side last. That's the only way you can do it, where you can get that 6 millimeter bend in there at the same time that you're doing all this together. Is do it kind of in reverse order that I did. I actually bent the 12mm one all the way out, then bent this side, and then went back and tried to bend this side, which you can't do. It's obviously quite easy to do on the bottom of frame 2 because it's accessible. It really doesn't matter what order you do things in on that one. As long as you do the 6mm one, then a 12mm one, the bottom flange on the other side, doesn't matter when you do that. So I just wanted to clarify that because I didn't realize that I could have done this differently until I started working on frame 6 here, and I had to do the exact same thing. And when I started looking at frame 6, I realized that I just could do the 6mm side first, the 12mm side, and then bend the other side. It's very easy to do in a break, and it saves a lot of time from having to try and form this on a wooden form. And it also gives you a much cleaner, straighter, final bend. This one here on frame 6 came out perfect. So just wanted to clarify that, just to let you know that you can do this on a bending break if you want to. I finished bending the 6mm lip that needed to be on these front fuselage supports and reinstalled these in here. They fit perfect, so I'm very happy with how that bending worked out. So what I'm now doing is I cut the strips that I'm going to use for the foam stiffeners for the front that have to pass through frame 2 here. And as you can see, these just won't quite fit through there. I probably got to take about 1mm off of just the notch out here on frame 2, at least on the sides. The top looks like it'll clear good, so I shouldn't have a problem there. But I'm just going to take out frame 2 here, just going to use a file and just to widen it out a little bit till I can get that through here so that I can start fitting these in here. I want to use this as kind of a guide to know exactly where those are supposed to pass through on the fuselage, and then I'll measure and put some tape on either side on the ends so that I can figure out exactly where it needs to be. And I'll keep fitting these into place. And once they're fit, I'll start preparing them for glue. I was able to get the one side of these stiffeners, foam stiffeners, fit into place. They're not perfect. I'm not too worried about it at this point because I need to glue the cap on the top, and until the cap's glued on the top, I'll fit it back in here. But just wanted to get the approximate length and get the ends kind of angled the way they should be. But since I've got these two to their basic shape, I'm gonna take these out, flip this over, and try and do the two on the other side, and I'll see if I can get all 4 caps glued on top tonight, so they'll be ready to start gluing in tomorrow. I was able to glue the caps on these stiffeners for the forward fuselage last night before I left, and as you can see, they dried overnight. I just put them in this fixture just to keep them nice and straight, and then I had some weights on top of here that I took off. Now you can see I did not allodyne these before I glued these together. Ever since I made that mistake on the forward fuselage where I ended up getting glue on the top of the caps and ended up gluing some wood pieces that were laid on top of here to glue the caps on, and having messed up the allodyne, I've actually found that it's easier to just go ahead and clean up these strips that go on top, glue them on, put weights on them, don't worry too much about glue coming out the sides, and then I just go ahead and sand down the tops a little bit if I get any glue on top, and then I'm able to pull these out and actually sand down the sides a little bit, and then I just put these in an allodyne bath afterwards. So I'll actually just take these out, I'll hold them upside down in a bath of allodyne for the 2.5 minutes it takes to allodyne them. It goes quickly. The allodyne doesn't hurt the foam. It's a closed cell foam, so it's not like it soaks anything up. And it seems to be, for me, the quickest and easiest way to just make sure that I can get all the glue off these after they're glued, clean them up, and then allodyne them and have them looking nice when they're done. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to unscrew these little forms because these are in here a little bit tight. And I'll pull these out, and I'll go ahead and allodyne them, and then I'll start doing the final fit into the forward fuselage. I do have to cut the ends off a little bit more to make them fit perfectly. But yeah, let me start working on that, and I'll show you what it looks like when I have them fit into the forward fuselage. So while I was waiting for the stiffeners to dry after gluing the caps on them, I decided to go back and actually make these angles that need to get installed on the bottom of frame 2, right along the pedal rails. So this is an angle that just goes basically, let me see which side I got here. This is this side. So it basically mounts on top of the pedal rail and mounts to the back side of frame 2. So it actually fits back up in here, something like that, which you can't really see, but anyway. I went ahead and bent those two. These are 40 thousandths, so they're a little thick. I was a little bit worried about these cracking. I did not anneal these because these are so small. I was worried about overheating them and creating the issue I had with the front ones that I bent there. So what I did is I just put these in the vise and just bent these around that 1/8 inch radius that I've used several times in the past. It does give a fairly big radius here, but it's not going to hurt anything, and I think it's better to be on the cautious side, I think, with getting these bent properly. So these two bent absolutely perfect using that method. They're exactly 57 degrees is what they're supposed to be. So I'm very happy with those. But what I'm going to do here is I think I can continue while these side parts or side stiffeners are drying, is I can go ahead and finish installing permanently the bottom of frame 2. I was able to get the first of these two stiffeners that goes on the back side of the bottom of frame 2 here. I don't know if I can scroll around here and see. You can see it behind there. I went ahead and alodined it and pop riveted it into place. Part of the issue with trying to get these installed is that you can't hold them behind here with temporary sheet metal fasteners because there's not enough space, obviously, to get them in straight. So there's no way to hold these in until you pop rivet them into place. Now, I kind of used a method of trying to not only locate exactly where this needs to go along the rail, but also be able to locate it on the back side of frame 2, because I already have the holes already drilled into these parts that are bent. So I'm going to show you what I ended up doing for that. Let me find my CriCri pliers. And before I take this all the way off, let me show you what I did here. So with this in place, with this CliCo'd in, I put a piece of blue tape that met right up with the edge of where frame 2 goes across the pedal rail here, so that I could, when I remove this frame 2, be able to see where that flange or that edge of frame 2 ended up touching the pedal rail. And so if I pull the last two of these out here, come on. All right, got that out. Let's pull this out. Okay, and you'll see the bracket now that I have installed there. So what I was able to do is take a scrap piece of aluminum. Let me find that. All right, here we go. And what I did is I just placed this on the center of the pedal rail, so the rivet holes here aligned with the center of it, and then I held this piece on the front of here and just checked to see where that would come down and touch right at the edge of my tape, which would simulate where frame 2 needed to be. And then what I went ahead and did is just drilled the holes through this bracket and attached it here to the pedal rail. And because I couldn't hold it in place to do any more testing to drill these holes, I went ahead and just pop riveted it in after I alodined it. But then what I needed to do is I had to figure out how to drill these holes through, which I couldn't get through the backside to even mark, to the front. And because, again, they were drilled into this, not into the frame 2 that goes into place there. So what I ended up doing for that, because this actually gets tucked up behind this, even up behind this little lip here. So once I got that into place, what I decided to do was take this, and let me see if I can do that with this one. So what I know is that this has to go, for example, back here, and it needs to be centered on that pedal rail. So what I did is I used a ruler. And you can see I didn't come prepared today. Alright, I'm not sure I can do this with one hand, but what I wound up doing was placing this ruler in here and pretending it was the pedal rail. And then I would set this bracket in here, and let's see if I can do this with one hand, and with this centered on the ruler, like so, I was able to hold it into here with it centered like this and figure out exactly where those holes needed to go. Now what I ended up doing was just drilling the bottom one there, which is the top on this side, but the one that's furthest away from us, I drilled that hole first, and ended up just doing that as a 1/16 inch hole. Then I went and permanently attached this bracket to the pedal rail and then put frame 2 back up there and tried to locate that hole. It wasn't perfect, I was a little bit off, but it was close enough with a 1/16 inch hole that I could widen it out to 3/32 and then to an 1/8 inch. So as long as you're within the hole range of where an 1/8 inch hole needs to go, you should be good. But these were a little bit tricky to get into place and figure out exactly how I was going to get these locate these brackets, because obviously these holes need to be in a pretty accurate spot. But I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with this one. I'm going to Aladyne this, pop rivet it on here. I'll first do what I showed you here and go ahead and just locate that bottom hole so that when I put frame 2 up here, hopefully I should be pretty close to where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and get this other one installed here, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish up the bottom of frame 2. I'll go ahead and clean this up. I'll Aladyne this, and I'm going to go ahead and pop rivet this across the bottom of the fuselage here and to these angle brackets. I can get that far before I continue on doing the stiffeners on the sides, and that will help me be able to, install these side pieces on here when I'm going to glue those into place so that I can hold that together. And then once the stiffeners are in here, I can go ahead and finish these side pieces up permanently. The question is whether or not I finish up the top of frame 2 or whether I make that removable. Obviously these parts here, I'm going to make these removable so I can get into here for now, I think. So I think I might just end up having some, CriCris holding some of this top stuff right around here together, so I have access to everything for even fitting some of the engine wiring, the fuel tank, the pedal, the actual pedal pan and pedals, and the rudder cables. There's a lot of stuff that needs to go on here that having this part of the aircraft in the front here open is going to be at least nice to have until all that's done. So let me start finishing up this bracket and get the bottom of frame 2 installed, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. I finished Aladyning the bottom of frame 2 and went ahead and just pop riveted that into place. I still had the 3/32 CriCris in there, so I removed one at a time, or a couple at a time, drilled them out to an 1/8 inch, and then just pop riveted it together. So that's completely finished. I went ahead and started fitting these stiffeners that need to go on the sides here. So I've got those all fit into place. I've just got some weight on it to hold it down for a second. I'm going to go ahead and Aladyne the tops of these, and then I'm going to start marking out exactly where the ends of these need to be placed. I think all I'm going to do is just make sure that the ends are in the right spot, and I'll just put tape on either side and then figure out a way to just hold them there. They'll be held in place here with the side of frame 2, which I'll temporarily put into place just to make sure these are in the right spot. And then I just need to mark and make sure these stay in the right spot in the nose here. I'm not going to worry about the rest of it. It's just going to curve naturally, I think, to to those 3 spots. I think that'll be okay, and then I'll just have to make sure I get enough weight on here to hold it down well enough that these stay down all the way on the bottom here, because I got to weight all the way up here and on down this this part. So I'm just going to keep working on these side parts and get these ready to glue into place, because that's what I just want to do next, and get these get these so that they sit overnight and dry, and then I can come back tomorrow, flip this over, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just continuing to fit these side stiffeners on the side panel here. I've pretty much got them ready to go. I put some tape here where the ends of these should be aligned on the outsides, and I also put some tape on the other ends here. They basically, on this side, on mine anyway, it butts up against the 2 rivets that are on frame 1 there, which works pretty good. This one actually butts up against this rivet here, and this one's kind of in the middle. So what I think I'm going to do here, though, is I think I'm going to actually prep this side frame on frame 2 that's going to hold these into position. And I think what I'm going to do is Aladyne this, and I'm actually going to glue this in at to the side with just the CriCris going through the side here at the same time that I glued these in place. I think that's the best way to do this, because I'm going to have to hold this down across here anyway to keep these positioned properly and keep the side panel, flat against the curvature of this form. It doesn't make sense for me not to glue this in at the same time. I can always just take the temporary sheet metal fasteners off and pop rivet it in then at any point. But this is one thing that I think I can complete, and it's probably just a piece across the top here that I won't complete. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and prep this side here and finish Aladyning this other piece. I'm going to Aladyne this then at the same time, and then we'll start gluing all this together. So I just pulled the weights off of the foam stiffeners that I left drying overnight. They came out pretty good. The only thing I would say is that I ended up getting a little bit too much glue underneath the front parts of these, and that's squeezed out of the side. It's very difficult when you get the weights on top of here to come back and clean it up afterwards, because you have to pull the weights back off, which you don't want to do because the stiffeners then aren't held down on the side anymore. So ideally I should have just put enough glue underneath there to glue these down and not so much that it would squeeze out. So that's the only thing I noticed here that I would probably go back and try and do differently. What I'm going to do next is go ahead and tip this up onto its bottom and then go ahead and drill out these holes for the frame 2 sides and get pop rivets installed along here. That way this side piece is permanently installed. I think what I'm going to do is wait to rivet the corner here until I get the other side done, where I can have it on its bottom sitting upright, and then go ahead and get the top panel installed on here and the cross piece on here, so they can make sure that those are 90 degrees, or at least in the correct angle, and we have the correct separation that we're keeping here to keep the upper skin here so it fits properly. But other than that, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, and I'm going to do this exact same thing I did here on the other side. So I'll go ahead and finish fitting the stiffeners in here. I'll get them alodined. We'll go ahead and alodyne the side piece here, and we'll just get it all ready to glue into place and let it sit overnight until tomorrow. And then we should have the stiffeners in the front part here done. I finished gluing in the right side of the fuselage stiffeners in the front, and also the right side of frame 2. This came out pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and flip this up onto, so it's right side up onto the bottom form, and I'll go ahead and final drill out the side holes here on the right side of frame 2 and get the pop rivets installed in there. Now at this point, I'm really at a point where I'm almost done with frame 2, but what I do want to do is put the cross piece here at the top of frame 2 back in with the temporary sheet metal fasteners, and then go ahead and get the top skin on the forward part here put in temporarily, so that I can final drill out all of the holes here on the bottom corners of the 2 side supports for frame 2, because I want to go ahead and final rivet these corners in. The top here, as I've mentioned before, I want to leave that removable for now, and we won't really finish the upper part of the frames here between frame 2 and frame 1 until I'm at a point where I'm ready to install the nose gear. So let me go ahead and get this flipped up and get these holes drilled out, and I'll final pop rivet this, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm ready to go ahead and drill out the corners of frame 2 here. Okay, I've got the outside of frame 2 on both sides now pop riveted together, and I went ahead and put the forward support here, the upper part of frame 2 back on, and the skin on the forward surface, just so that I can make sure that everything is nice and square and aligned properly before I final drill out all the corner holes here and the corner holes over here. And I'll go ahead and just get all the pop rivets in there. There's no reason not to put those in at this place at this point, since I have all of this all set up and connected together properly. So let me go ahead and get these holes drilled out on either side and get some pop rivets in there, and then I'll show you what it looks like. I think what I might do with this front part here, the top part of frame 2, and this forward part, is I might go ahead and allodyne those. I could even pop rivet this forward assembly together with itself, these 2 cross supports together with those other supports that are part of that, and actually pop rivet that to the top of frame 2, and then just make it so that I can remove frame 2 at the top corners here and the front on frame 1. I think that's what I'm going to do until I determine that I can install that permanently. Like I said, I do want to have access here to start building a fuel tank that's going to go in here, and having that removable at this point to be able to not only get to the rudder pedal assembly and cables and nose gear and things like that. I think having this whole entire part here that will come off is a good thing. So the other thing I noticed, though, is the forward part of this fuselage is solid as a rock now. So even removing these parts from the top skin and the forward part here on the top, this thing is still solid as a rock. And I think once I get these corners pop riveted together with frame 2, I'm not going to have any issues with this moving or twisting or anything from here going forward. So Let me drill these out and get some pop rivets in these corners. All right, I finished installing the pop rivets in the lower corners of frame 2 on both sides. I know I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because this is another place where I noticed it myself. Anytime you can avoid final drilling your holes out to the actual rivet size until you're ready to install the rivets, the better off you are. After after pop riveting the bottom part in here, gluing and pop riveting the side parts in here, taking the plastic off the parts, these holes in the corner here were not exactly aligned anymore. They were close. But I did have to go back and drill all of these back out to 3/32 hole to just realign the holes a little bit and then final drill them to an 1/8 inch. These, for some reason on this side, were off more than that side, which meant I probably didn't have this pulled all the way tight against the skin with the Clecos when I was installing it. But anyway, just remember that, because if I had tried to install on this side at least the full 1/8 inch rivets that were final drilled, they would not have fit. And we certainly don't want to make a hole bigger than an 1/8 inch when we're installing rivets. So just remember that. But anyway, this part's done. So what I think I'm going to do now is go back up to the top here. I'm going to go ahead and finish off these supports that are in between here on these and go ahead and get these parts all alidined. I'm even going to pop rivet the ends here. So the only thing I'm not going to pop rivet is the top of frame 2 in the corners. And then on the front here, I'm not going to pop rivet this to the front. That way I can just take this whole assembly on top off all by itself as one piece. So that's the only thing I'm going to finish on this before I call frame 2 done. So let me go work on that and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. I was able to get these upper supports for the forward fuselage alidined, and I got the supports that go in between those pop riveted into place. I also pop riveted these to the top of frame 2, but then, like I said, I've left just temporary sheet metal fasteners here in the corners of frame 2 and also on the front here on frame 1, so this whole thing can be pulled in and out right now as needed. But at this point, I'm basically calling frame 2 complete. We will finish up this and permanently install it once we finish setting up and installing the nose gear up here, but I do want to finish some more things like the fuel tank and the pedal rails. I'm sorry, the rudder pedals that need to be installed on top of the pedal rails down here. So this looks good, and yeah, so I think what we're actually going to continue on with next is I'm calling the forward part of fuselage in front of frame 4 done. But what I'm going to do next then is actually start fitting the rear fuselage onto the end here so that I can get everything drilled for frame 7. And then we'll go back and start off at frame 4 and work our way backwards with frame 5 and 6 and the seat pan and some of those other things we need to finish in the back here. I'm not going to actually attach the tail until I get the landing gear attached and secured to the forward fuselage. Once I get this on its wheels, I will go ahead and install the tail permanently, or the rear fuselage permanently. So this is looking really good. So we'll see you in the next video.